But before we get started on putting together our LeMoyne Star, which is behind me on the design wall, I am going to share with you about our next project and the upcoming weeks. This week we're going to do the LeMoyne Star. Next week I am taking the Saturday off, have some family commitments, and then on the 29th I will do an introduction for our next project. And here is a picture of our next project. It's called My Flower Garden, and this will be starting on June 12th. With the kits will be available to purchase on May 29th. When you go into the shop, you will see this picture or a portion of it on the screen in the shop, and click on it. And where it shows the kit, it says notify me, and if you hit that, you will be registered to get an email for when those kits are ready for purchase. The shop people are working very hard to get those kits put together. This is a quilt that does not, there wasn't a fabric line or anything, so they're putting those kits together right now. We'll have them all done by May 29th, so you can purchase it at that time. And I'm really looking forward to that particular quilt. It caught my attention, and looking forward to making it alongside with you. And it'll take about 6 weeks. There are 6 sections to that pattern, and so we'll have a 6-week time frame in that. And then on June 5th, I am going to teach what I did on the quilt show with Alex, the paper cloth, the paper napkin and cloth art project that we kind of did. I'm going to call it an art project, but it was making a little mini quilt. And then on June 12th, we will start My Flower Garden. So I'm looking forward to that. But today we are going to learn how to put together the LeMoyne Star. This is a block that I absolutely adore. I learned how to get it to work and all my points to meet in the middle, and then through the years of teaching it, learned another technique that makes it easier for me, and I want to share that technique with you today, as well as the traditional way that we go about putting a LeMoyne Star together. And I'll explain a little bit of why I do what I do, and we'll go from there. And hopefully this star will be something that you will enjoy putting together too. And you put it together like the Bethlehem Star, the Lone Star, all of those blocks are really this same method or the same technique to putting this block together. So hopefully we'll all have fun doing that. Let me drop to the camera in front of me and we'll get started. I am going to make a 6-inch block today with you. So I have my fabrics that will go for the diamond shape, and I've cut my strips. I'm going to use these 2 fabrics for my diamonds, and I've cut my strips at 1 3/4 inch wide. And so that's going to be for the diamonds. Then my corner blocks are my next grouping that I'm going to cut, and I need 4 squares that are 2 1/4 inch squares. And then as for the diamonds or the triangles that go into the block, I have cut 4. I need 4 of these triangles, and so what I'm going to do is cut a 3 3/4 inch square, and I'm going to cut it on the diagonal. And I have a square here that I cut just for that purpose. So in case there's anyone that doesn't quite understand that diagonal twice, cut to get those triangles. So I'm going to cut this way once, and then I'm going to turn it and cut on the diagonal this way, And then now I've got my 4 triangles. And that's what these are right here. So now I have all of my parts, except I wanted to show you now the cutting of the diamonds. So I have my 1 3/4 inch wide strip, and when I want to cut for my diamond shape, I am going to take and pay very close attention to my 45 inch degree line, because that's what I need to get my diamond shape. So I have it here on the board, and I am going to lay that ruler, and to save fabric and all of that, I'm going to get it fairly close to the edge to get that 45 degree angle started. And so right now I have it on 60 degrees, and that's not going to give me any help. All right, so I have it now on the 45 degree line on the top of my strip right there. And I'm going to take my rotary cutter, and I am going to put that 45 degree angle now on that strip. And because I cut my strip 1 3/4 inches wide, I am again going to put my 45 degree line across the top of my strip. So it's on that 45 degree line, and my strip was 1 3/4 inches wide. So I am going to go in 1 3/4 inches, and that is along that 45 degree angle on the side. So now I can cut my strips or my diamonds for my block, and I need 4 of them for this. And so again, I am going to have that on the 1 3/4, that on the 45, and I can keep going with that until I get all 4 of those made. Sometimes this angle that I'm working with the machine there makes that a little. So again, 45 degree line across the top, and down the side I've got my one 3/4 inch, making sure that that's all lined up straight, because this is really important with the LeMoyne Star, that you have everything lined up correctly. Accuracy in your cutting and your sewing, all of that is very important. Well, it's important all the time, but especially so on this particular block. So now I have all of the pieces that I need to make the block, and the first thing that we are going to do is get our blades the way we want them. And so I'm putting mine every other one. And these can all be the same. You can have every blade different. It's totally, your design, what you want to, how you want it to make it. And then the triangles go right in these spaces as I'm building my block, and the squares go in the corners. All right, so there we have our block, and I make the block in units. So the first unit that I'm going to make is this one right here. And as I work around the star, I am going to stitch from here to here, here to here, and then we'll go down the center, and then we're going to put the square here. Then I'm going to make section number 2, and then section number 3, and section number 4. And then we'll sew these two sections together. Then I'm going to sew these two sections together. So when we put these, I'm going to press that little tip. It has a little. So I'm going to begin by taking my diamond shape and putting it over. Traditionally, you would have used a template, or you're going to be marking the back of your fabric. And the way that I mark that, let me move this aside for just a second so I can share that with you. Instead of putting the dots or using a template plastic with the holes that we punch in it, because I find that those marks sometimes are too big, and it's hard to know where the center of that dot is. So I'll go up and I'll mark it at the 1/4 inch at all of the corners around my diamonds. Traditionally, where they come, I would do the same thing on my squares. I would put that 1/4 inch, get it lined up. I would make in all 4 corners those lines there so I can see where the intersection comes, and that would be my starting and stopping point, and I would mark every piece on that. But since for whenever, I have been doing that just a bit differently, and that's what I would like to show you today. So I have my red on my left side, the blue on the right side in all of my groupings. So I'm going to take my triangle, and I'm going to take my red diamond first. I'm going to put that right in there and match up this top part and along the side. And I just want to point out to you that on this, you're going to have this little triangle sticking off the side, and that's what you should have at that point. So I am going to now sew, and normally you would stop at that point where you made the dot, or that your 1/4 inch crosses that point, but I am going to completely sew through. And so I'm going to make sure that I keep that 1/4 inch, and I'm going to completely sew through that piece. All right, so and this is something, I'm not going to worry about this a whole lot right now, but this is why pinning is sometimes a good idea, because this fabric moved just a little bit on me right there. And then when you finish at a 1/4 inch, it should match up and be right there in that point. And so I think I can work with that. And then you want to make sure that this goes down, and I'm not pressing it at this point because I'm working with bias, and that bias, so I'm holding this down, and then I'm going to put my other side on. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to match up the top, and I'm going to match it up down here, except this time I'm going to drop a pin because it moved the last time, and so I noticed that, and I don't want that to move again. So now I'm going to again sew through to the end of that piece. And that's under there at my 1/4 inch. And when I get to the end of that, that second, in this case, the blue fabric, I'm going to stop that, and now I have those two pieces, and as you can see, it's sewn right here. So I'm going to turn that over, and I'm going to take the, my machine is still knotting, so I got rid of that knot, and now I'm going to take the back side of my seam ripper, and I'm going to take those two stitches out, and it is still connected at the corner. And so now I'm going to go here and take that stitch out, and I'm using the back so it doesn't cut the thread, because I want the threads to stay there. It's going to hold that in. So now where that intersection would be, I only have one thread instead of the knotted, you know, because normally you would sew to that dot, back stitch, and then stop, and this way you would sew, and I am so sorry. So I took the stitches out, and I will show this numerous times as we go through this. So I sewed to the end of here. I turned this over. I removed the two stitches here, and I removed those two stitches there. And traditionally, you would sew down and you would get to this point and you would stop in where the dot was that you've made, or the mark. You would back stitch and then go back, and you would come down here and do the same thing. What I was finding is I was getting a little bit of a pile of thread there, so that when I opened it up to the front after I had sewn it, I had this kind of a little bit of a lump there, and it would look a little distorted or whatever. So I started just sewing through, and I know that other people do this, and you've probably seen it elsewhere, but I wanted to show it on this star. So now to sew that middle seam, I am going to take my triangle and fold it back on itself, match up um, that center seam. And here is where I find that it's really important to pin, because you've got all these layers. And so I want to make sure that that stays together where it needs to. And I'm going to match up my points down here at this. Everything, I should only see the blue on the front. No red showing on that side. So I'm going to drop again a pin into that that point, because I really don't want my fabric to move. So I've got a pin here and I've got a pin here, and I am going to come to this side and make sure everything is lined up again, because I sew from the point to here. And the reason that I sew from the point to here is if I can start at the point, I know it's not going to move on me. I will sew that in directly. So I'm going to go to the point of my block. And again, even though I can see where I'm supposed to stop, I don't want to stop and back stitch there. Again, I'm sewing all the way through. And now again, I'm going to take my seam ripper and I'm going to remove those two stitches that come where, and I don't know if on camera you can see, I still have my pencil line going in both directions, and it's meeting right there. And this is where my lock stitch happens, so I'm just going to go in and break that little knot, and then I'm going to remove those two stitches again using the back side of my seam ripper. And then when I open this up, ready for pressing, that just comes out really wonderfully. And then I am going to press at this point, that's center seam open. I hit that little where it comes together, and then I will go back to the front and make sure that I hit those seam lines, and then just let it press together so that I have now those points coming together and it looks wonderful. It's laying flat. I don't have that little bit of thread there that can sometimes become distorted in that center part. So now I'm going to take my square, and I can get rid of that little bunny ear so that I don't have that bulk in there. So I just cut that off. And again, I'm lining up my square along here. I am squaring it up here. I have that little triangle showing on that side. And now I'm going to sew along this side right here. So 1/4 inch seam. And again, I'm sewing through. All right, and at this point, I have that unit sewn together, and I am not going to do any more pressing on that because I'm going to work with that a little bit later. Again, now I'm going to go to my next unit that's the same as the first. And if you choose to do yours traditionally, you would have your markings on the back side where all your intersections come together. But again, my red is to the left. I'm going to take my triangle. I am going to match up the points, and I am going to make sure that this is even on the top and that is on the bottom. And because that moved on me the first time and I don't want that to happen again, I'm going to drop a pin in there. And again, I'm starting from the point so that that is set, and I don't have to worry about that point getting off because I really do want the accuracy that that we're all looking for as we sew any block. And again, I sew straight through. And I come back and I bring, so now that I've taken that out, I have sewn and it's come out at that point where those two fabrics meet right there. I'm bringing this and I'm bringing this down with my thumb and finger. I'm going to now to the right side of that triangle. I am lining up my diamond shape. I'm going to put a pin there, and I also want to put a pin at this point just so that doesn't move again, and I go straight in and then turn my pins so they don't move on me. And then we're going to once again sew down that side. And once again I am sewing through to the end of that blue fabric. I'm going to turn it over, and where that my machine knotted it there, I undid that knot. I've got those two threads that so I've unknotted the knot. I removed those two threads that come together. I'm coming to this side and I'm removing those two threads right there. Now I have that opening, and I want to fold this back on itself, and I am going to again make sure that that is all lined up. Drop a pin there so it doesn't move on me at all, and I want to make sure my points are lined up where I'm going to sew it from the point down. And I'm going to drop pin this way and I want another pin here simply because for whatever reason the fabric is moving a little bit on me today, so I want to make sure that doesn't happen again. And I'm going to start again. And again, I am sewing all the way through. And now that I've sewn all the way through, I am going to go in between and get rid of that knot that was made. And then again, I'm releasing those 2 stitches with the back of my seam ripper. And that one is already released from before. I open that up on this side, and that just kind of releases those threads there, making sure that I've got them straight. And now I want to press that center seam open and hit that dot right there so it's nice and flat. And I'm going to press those seams with the side of my iron. And again, I really appreciate that flatness that comes with that. I am going to snip off my little bunny ear. And now it's time for the square to go in. Again, being very particular about making sure that it is lined up appropriately. And then we'll sew down that again with the and we've got that going on that side. I'm going to leave that as it is. And on screen today, you may or may not be hearing like drums in the background, or it's the bass to loud music. It's graduation time here where I am, and we have quite a few teenagers in our neighborhood, and although my windows and doors are all closed, they have the music quite loud. So if you're hearing a drum beating in the back, we ask them to turn it down a little bit for this hour, but it seems to have been turned back up. So if that's what you're hearing, that is what you are hearing. If you're wondering what the noise is in the background today, it's the neighbors having a party for their teenage daughter, and they're starting early today. So I am going to come back to this. And that's not, and I think I lost my thread. So let me rethread my machine. And I don't know if I've ever said this before, but when I thread my machine, I try to cut my thread at a 45-degree angle because it seems to go through the needle a whole lot better and much easier than when I don't. So I cut my thread there at a 45-degree angle, and because I started and that point got a little mooshed right there, I'm going to go ahead and, because I've got my pins in, I'm going to sew from the back side and take it up to that point. and really kind of hold on to it. Those are those little adjustments you make when you kind of learn your machine and how it responds and reacts to different things. So I've sewn my red side now, and now I'm going to go, um, I have gotten the red side sewn. I'm going to move to the right side of this triangle. And I'm kind of taking a little bit of time with this, so it's not going too fast. And if you see it, 4 times, hopefully within those 4, you're going to get a good view of how this block goes together. At least the way that I do it. There are, there are many different methods to putting this block together, but this one seems to give me some really good results, and I am glad that I have an opportunity to share it with you, because I also love the LeMoyne Star and the Bethlehem Star quilts. They're some of my favorites, and I can get really good results by doing this. So hopefully you will maybe give it a shot and see if it works for you as you work through the LeMoyne Star. So I broke my knot that my machine makes. I'm going to remove those 2 stitches. And again, I'm coming over here and removing those 2 stitches. And now it's time to bring my triangle back and get everything lined up well there, pinning it so it stays in place, getting it all lined up on the back, and all right. Again, I like to start at the point. And again, sewing through. And I will again remove those, the knot first. So I'm going to remove the knot first by going in between. I'm going to bring back those 2 stitches. And I don't want to cut them because that just gives me extra insurance that that is not going to separate, and they're locked in place because the stitches are still crossed over each other. And now I'm going to press that middle seam open, get that flat. Press it in, and then I press that little point right there. I'm going to get that side, both sides nice and even. Press down. I'm going to snip off that little triangle right there. Get my square, put that in place, line it up across the top and the side. I'm going to drop my pin in so that doesn't move at the top, and just for safekeeping, because the accuracy of your seams and all of that makes this block come out perfect in the end. So I've got that pinned, and now I'm going to sew that side. Again, sewing straight through. And now I've got 3 of those units complete, and now I'm going to work on the last one very quickly here. as we work through. So I've got my units. I am going to place, so I've got my 4th unit all set up. Those 3 units are there. I'm going to bring that over on that side of this point. Drop pin so that there's no movement in my fabric. I can't emphasize that enough. I know I've said that over and over again. It seems redundant, but really, you know, on something, on a block like this, and my machine is not wanting to push that real well today. I need to get my leaders going. That's part of my problem. So let me bring my needle up. Let me bring that up. And I will sew it from the other direction. Because I've got that thread there. So I'm going to need to put my leader back in. And another thing that I didn't mention at the beginning, you're really going to want to have definitely make sure your single throat plate is in, especially when you're sewing from points and things like that and into these corners, because if the open plate's there, it's going to, more than what I just did, chew up your fabric. So make sure that you are using your leaders and enders on this one, at least for the most part. All right, so I have the left side sewn on. Now I'm going to move to, now I'm moving to the right side, getting everything in place. All right. That's much better with the leader there. So good lesson. And I should know better. All right. So now I get my, I'm going to break that knot again. I am going to take those 2 stitches up on both sides of that. Open that up. Fold it back on the triangle like that. So everything is matching up. All right. So all right. Here I've got breaking the knot, removing those 2 stitches on this side. Those 2 are already removed. Opening this up. This one fabric is kind of fraying a lot. I'm going to press that center seam open and push it right into that corner. I tap where the seams crossed. I'm going to press, making sure those seams are nice and flat there. I am going to get rid of my little bunny ear. And pin my side piece in place. I want that leader back in there for the next round. All right, so now I've got my 4 units finished. And now comes putting it together. And basically I want to sew half of it and half. So I'm going to sew these 2 together first and these 2 next. So again, I'm going to sew this unit together the same way I really have been all along. So again, this comes down. I'm going to kind of finger press that to the bottom. I want to sew, first of all, I'm going to get rid of my little bunny ear. And then I want to line this one up along that square. And I'm going to drop a pin so that that stays put where I need it to stay put. And we'll sew that down at that point right there. I'm going to kind of guide that seam so that my fabric doesn't move on me. All right. So now I've sewn down that side, and now I need to release the knot right there, and then again release those 2 stitches and release the stitches on this side as well so that they're still crossed at that point. And then I'm going to now sew these 2 and that I need to just a second, that knot didn't quite release, so I need to get that knot out of the way. It's stuck in the fabric. All right, so now I'm taking the square and it's going to go back on itself just as the triangle did before, and still didn't get that quite released there. All right, so now as we're coming into this point, our little points right here should line up, and we can pin that right in there, and then this should all line up at this point in time. So we're kind of doing it the same way we have before, and at this point in time, and I got to make sure this side where I'm going to sew it. So I take an extra little bit of time so I know that those points are all coming together exactly as they should be, and those points are lining up right in there. So I'm going to sew down those at this point, down to that, getting this going up here. And here is where a stiletto kind of becomes important to me, because I really want those triangles to line up and stay even, and I could keep a pin in those points, you know, a little bit longer and make sure that goes through. But my stiletto works for me on getting that to stay put. I just hold the stiletto there. And now when those two open up, when you get to that point and those two open up, those seam lines meet. And I hope that you can see that. There's a little yellow leaf flower right in the point, but I hope you can see that that point does line up. And so again, I'm going to remove those two stitches that are here and release that. And then I'm pressing again that center point open, and I push that, and so now I've got that half of my star put together, and now it's time to do the same thing on this side. And I'm going to get rid of my little bunny ear. And I want to press that. And remember, this needs to go away from the seam line on that side. You're pressing, as we did with every single one, we pressed, you know, those down, so we got all of those in place. And now I'm going to sew down this side. And I stop again at the end of the diamond. Again, I'm releasing both of those threads from that side. I'm getting rid of that that knot piece there. I'm lifting up those two threads on this side. That opens up, and now I need to fold that where the square is, that it just kind of wants to fold itself already in place. So I'm going to fold that back and make sure on both sides it's all lined up, and I want that to stay in place. So again, I you know, use my pins and make sure that everything lines up. And I really want to make sure those seam lines are coming together right in that point. So again, I pin fairly close to the bottom of that because that's really where I want it to stay connected for sure. And it's not going to run away on me with that. So, and again, I'm going to use my stiletto just to hold everything in place there, because I will be removing that pin as I get closer to that. And here is where my stiletto comes in handy, because I can keep those two fabrics held together so they don't move on me, and I can run my needle right all the way through, and keep that center seam line exactly aligned, if you will. And then I'm going to go back again, and I'm going to remove those two stitches right there, open that up, and press that. Now I've removed my two threads. I've got that. I need to press in the center, press those seams open. All right. And they just lay really flat that way. And now it's time to sew those two units together. So now what I'm going to do to get those two sides is exactly the same thing that I have been doing. I'm going to sew down here. I am going to sew down here, and then I will sew straight across, matching those points so that all of those points come together in the center. So the first thing I need to do is to get rid of some bunny ears. It just adds extra bulk. You could probably leave them there. But I like it to lay nice and flat when it's done. So if I can get rid of some of that bulk, I will. But I'm not going to remove my bunny ears here in the center, because those are going to help guide me with these two on this side will match up with those. So I'm leaving those there, because in that process, if I can match my point right here and those bunny ears, then I've got those extra places where it all comes together for that. So again, lining up that side, making sure that seam line is pressed down, dropping my pin right there. I want to keep that in place, so I'm going to drop a pin there before I sew. It's taking a lot more time to do this on camera than it normally does when you're just sewing on your own. So it is it's what we would consider a complicated block, but it's not so complicated that it can be quite doable. And one does not have to fear this block. It's just knowing how it all comes together and works as a so here I'm removing that where it knotted in this. So I've got to go under that first seam, get rid of that stitch where the knot was. Now I can remove those other stitches and pull out the threads where the knot was. And I can do that on the back, on this side of it, so it's open. All right, so now again, this square is wanting to just fold back on itself, and I'm going to get everything aligned. And now here in this center part, this is probably where most people want it to come together. I know that I do. I'm going to put my pin in right at that point that it comes together, right there in that point, so you can see the needle. Then I'm going to go to the other side and drop it right in the same point, push it all the way through, put that needle between my two fingers to hold it straight. Now I can see that my points are aligned on both sides, and this is where I will drop my pin going across at that angle that I always do. It's going to hold those both together so that when I come at that 1/4 inch, it's going to hit right there in that center. Now I come back and I'm going to make sure this is lined up, and there's a thread there that's not quite released. I didn't get it pulled all the way through. So I'm going to just release that one thread so it lays nice and flat. And just simply because this is where, for me, the rubber meets the road, as the saying goes. I want that, and I'll get rid of some of these threads. This one fabric is really ravelly. And then, and I did all of that before I sewed that side. So I'm going to remove that, and we'll do that again. I am so sorry. With that today. So I'm going to go back and do this side because we need to have this side sewn. We can't make our block. I love it when I mess up on camera. All right. So now I can sew this side before I do that center, but then we can do that center again. And if you didn't quite see it the first time, you'll see it again hopefully in the second time through. I want to make sure my seam is to the bottom. All right. So I want to come back, and over here I'm going to release that knot. I want to get rid of those threads that are hanging out there, holding those back on that side. Doing it, those 2 threads there. All right, now this can fold back on itself, and I've got both sides now pinned so that I can sew through the center. And so let's go back to that center point again. I am going to take my pin and I am going to drop that right in that point as it comes in. I'm going to go to the other side and put my pin right there at that point. Push it all the way through, put it between my fingers to hold it straight. I can see that when it's in there straight that all of my little points there are lining up. Then I'm going to drop my pin at that diagonal across there, and then I can actually remove that center pin, and then I want to just come back and drop a pin right there just so that everything stays put where I want it to. Let's get rid of some of these strings again. Lots of raveling today. All right. So let's sew that across. I think I'll get that leader in there. And I don't know that you can see it on camera, but you will see when you try this for yourself that you're crossing that stitching line right where the 2 lines would normally meet. So again, I'm bringing and pressing, and this little point is laying right along that seam line. So I'm just going to press it down and make sure it stays put where it's supposed to, because those 2 are aligning just wonderfully. And, you know, I don't know that it is visible on screen, but my needle is going right into that hole where I had my pin. So that's telling me that I probably got my center points all aligned, and they're going to come out exactly the way I'm hoping for them to come out. At least that's what I am going for. And the big reveal, if I manage to make that happen. So I've got those all, and for the last time, I'm, you know, going back to those 2 stitches on either side for that last time, pulling up those threads. And this, you know, pulling up the threads may seem annoying, but for me, marking everything and going over that multiple times. So I've, you know, removing the threads on both sides there and removing those 2 threads over here. Opening that up, just making sure the threads are, I've got that knot right there, so I want to get rid of that where my machine knotted that point. There we go. And then that one was ready. And now I am going to press that center seam open. And I generally start in the center right here, and I put the nose of my iron right on that, and I will press in one direction first, then I turn it around and press from the other direction. It just seems to be easier. And I'm only using the point of my iron at this time, and then I turn it over and I press this side, I press on that side, drop my iron down, and make sure that this side is all nice and flat in there. Then I'm going to come back and get that point there, press on this side, press this side, and now I've got, just getting it nice and flat, making sure all the seams are going in the direction that I want them to go in. And here is where you could use that precision pressing, your best press, your flatter, whatever. But there is the LeMoyne Star, and in the center, miss that one right here, so I may go back and take that center part out and restitch it. Just on this one, but all the other seams come together, and it looks a little distorted because that flower comes right in the center, but all those patterns are coming together in the center, and there you have your LeMoyne Star put. And hopefully that was an enjoyable process for you to see how that block comes together, and you know, to make those. And you can make them any size, so whatever your pattern says, you can put it together in the same way, in the traditional manner where you mark each corner, stop and start at the point. That's the way you know, many of us learned to make it and did that. I found that if I sew straight through, that I get a little bit more accuracy, and all of my points come together, and you know, and I can use those those little triangle tip points to line everything up and make it work. So next week I will not see you, but I will see you back on May 29th, and on that day I will give you all the information and everything that we're going to be doing, and a little bit more about the quilt that we are going to be doing next, which is my flower garden. And I'm very excited about getting started on this particular quilt. And then on June 12th, we will start with our first section on my flower garden for that. You guys have an absolute wonderful week, and I will see you back. I guess it will be Memorial Weekend. So see you then.